Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. Return to Ruins. Staff Sergeant Steve Nash adjusted his dress uniform one final time as the military transport pulled into the familiar streets of Millbrook. 3 tours in Afghanistan had hardened him into something different from the naive 22-year-old who'd left 6 years ago. Now 28, with silver threading through his dark hair and scars mapping stories across his hands, Steve carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen hell and walked out standing. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as he approached 1247 Maple Street, the modest 2-story house he'd bought for Deborah Wright after their wedding. His heart raced with anticipation. He'd managed to keep his early return a surprise, wanting to see the pure joy on his wife's face and his son Toby's reaction to Daddy coming home. Steve had spent the last month of his deployment planning this moment. He'd saved every penny of combat pay to surprise them. Maybe take Toby to that baseball camp he'd been begging for in his letters, or finally get Deborah the kitchen renovation she'd dreamed about. The white picket fence needed paint, and the lawn had grown wild. Strange, considering how meticulous Deborah had always been about appearances. Steve's trained eye caught other details. An unfamiliar black Escalade in the driveway, expensive-looking outdoor furniture on the porch that he'd never seen before, and new security cameras mounted under the eaves. He climbed the front steps, muscle memory guiding him to the spare key hidden under the loose board. But when he inserted it into the lock, it didn't fit. The locks had been changed. Steve rang the doorbell, puzzled but not yet alarmed. Maybe Deborah had security concerns while he was deployed. It made sense. Footsteps approached, and Steve straightened, ready to sweep his family into his arms. The door swung open. A man Steve had never seen before stood in the doorway, wearing Steve's favorite burgundy robe, the one Toby had given him for Father's Day 3 years ago. The stranger was tall, perhaps 40, with perfectly styled silver hair and the soft look of someone who'd never missed a meal. His manicured fingers gripped the doorframe possessively. "Wrong house," the man said simply, starting to close the door. Steve's combat reflexes kicked in. His boot blocked the door before it could shut. "Excuse me. I said wrong house, soldier boy. Move along. This is my house." Steve's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Where's my wife? Where's Deborah Nash?" The man's expression shifted to something between amusement and irritation. "Deborah," he called over his shoulder. "Come deal with this." Steve heard familiar footsteps, the quick, light gait he'd dreamed about for months. Deborah appeared beside the stranger, and Steve's world tilted. She looked different. Her brown hair was shorter, styled expensively. She wore jewelry he'd never seen, a diamond necklace that probably cost more than his annual salary. But it was her expression that stopped his heart. No surprise, no joy, just cold calculation. "Hello, Steve." Her voice was steady, almost bored. "Deborah, what's going on? Who is this man? Why is he wearing my robe in my house?" She stepped closer to the stranger, whose arms snaked possessively around her waist. "This is Donald Fox. He lives here now. You don't." The words hit Steve like an IED blast. His ears rang as the world narrowed to tunnel vision. "What do you mean I don't live here? This is my house. We're married. We have a son." "Had," Deborah corrected coolly. Past tense. Steve's training kicked in, forcing down the chaos threatening to overwhelm him. "Stay calm. Gather intelligence. Assess the situation." "What do you mean, Had? Where's Toby?" For the first time, something flickered across Deborah's face, but it wasn't guilt or sorrow. It was something colder. She exchanged a glance with Donald, who nodded slightly. "He got sick 2 months ago," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Leukemia. The doctor said he had a chance, but treatment was expensive and complicated. We decided it wasn't worth the financial strain." Steve felt the ground shifting beneath him. "What are you saying?" "We gave up on him," Donald interjected with a casual shrug, as if discussing the weather. "Kid kept crying for his daddy when we stopped the treatments. Pretty pathetic, really. He was screaming your name when we dropped him off at county care," Deborah added. "Kept saying you'd come home and fix everything. Delusional to the end." The words hit Steve like physical blows. His son, his brave, bright 8-year-old boy who collected baseball cards and dreamed of being a soldier like his father, had died alone, abandoned, calling for him. "You abandoned our son? You let him die?" Steve's voice was barely above a whisper, but both Deborah and Donald took an involuntary step backward. "Our son." Deborah laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "Steve, you were never home. 3 deployments in 6 years? Toby barely knew you. And honestly, the life insurance wasn't enough to make keeping him worthwhile once he got sick." "Insurance?" Steve's mind reeled. "You're talking about life insurance?" $50,000, Donald said smugly. "Not bad for a kid who was going to die anyway. We used it for the down payment on the new Escalade." Steve looked at the vehicle in his driveway, bought with his son's life insurance money. The rage building inside him was unlike anything he'd experienced, even in combat. This was personal. This was his family. This was his child. "Where is he buried?" Steve asked quietly. "County Cemetery," Deborah said dismissively. "Plot 47B, Potter's Field. They have a little marker with his name, if you want to visit." The dismissive tone, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of remorse. It crystallized something in Steve's mind. These weren't the people he'd left behind. These were predators who'd seen opportunity in his absence and his son's illness. Steve stepped back from the door, his face a mask of controlled fury. "I understand." "Good," Donald said, relaxing slightly. "Now run along. We have dinner reservations at 7. "Just one more question," Steve said, his voice conversational. "How long have you two been together?" Deborah and Donald exchanged another glance. "What does it matter?" she said. "Humor me." 3 years, Donald said proudly. "Met her at the country club. Best investment I ever made." 3 years. Steve had been deployed for the last 18 months, which meant they'd been together while he was still sending money home, still writing letters to his son, still believing he had a family waiting for him. "Investment," Steve repeated softly. "Well, yeah," Donald continued, apparently mistaking Steve's quiet tone for defeat. "Beautiful woman, nice house, kid with good insurance. It was a package deal, though honestly, the kid was dead weight. Much better now that it's just us." Steve Nash had survived firefights, roadside bombs, and some of the most dangerous missions the military had to offer. He'd been decorated for valor under fire and had never backed down from a fight. But standing on his own front porch, listening to his wife and her lover casually discuss their abandonment of his dying son, he felt something break inside him. Not break as in shatter, break as in snap free, like a chain that had been holding something back. "Thank you," Steve said quietly, "for clarifying everything." He turned and walked back to his rental car, his movements controlled and purposeful. Behind him, he heard Deborah and Donald laughing about something. The sound followed him down the driveway, like a promise. As Steve drove away from the house that was no longer his home, heading toward a motel room that would serve as his new base of operations, one thought echoed in his mind with crystal clarity. They had made a terrible mistake. Chapter 2. Gathering Intel. The Riverside Motel sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, like a forgotten afterthought, its neon sign flickering between vacancy and darkness. Steve had chosen it specifically because it was the kind of place where cash spoke louder than questions, and he needed time to think without interference. Room 247 was sparse, but clean, a bed, a desk, a chair, and a window that looked out over the truck stop parking lot. Steve had requested a room facing away from town. He wasn't ready to look toward Maple Street again. Not yet. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the military duffel bag that contained everything he owned in the world. 6 years of deployment pay should have been enough for a house down payment, maybe a small business. Instead, it was apparently going toward Donald Fox's lifestyle and his own son's life insurance. The rage was still there, cold and controlled, but Steve pushed it aside. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. He needed facts. He needed to understand exactly what had happened in his absence, and, more importantly, how to make it right. The first call was to his lawyer, or rather, the lawyer who was supposed to be his lawyer. Marcus Brewer had handled Steve's will and power of attorney before his last deployment. A small-town attorney with a good reputation, Marcus had seemed trustworthy enough. Nash, Marcus sounded surprised. I thought you weren't due back for another month. Change of plans. Marcus, I need to ask you about some things. The house on Maple Street. Marcus's tone shifted, becoming guarded. Yes, well, that was handled according to your wife's wishes. She had power of attorney. After all, what exactly was handled? A pause. Steve, perhaps we should meet in person to discuss this. I'm asking now. Marcus sighed. Deborah filed for divorce 8 months ago. Since you were unreachable and she had legal authority to act on your behalf, the proceedings went forward. The house was sold to satisfy joint debts. Sold? To whom? A private buyer. Donald Fox, I believe. Look, Steve, she had documentation showing significant medical bills for your son, and... Steve hung up. The picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't pretty. His next call was to the Veterans Affairs office. Jerry Manning, his old contact there, answered on the second ring. Steve Nash? Jesus, buddy, when did you get back? I tried to reach you about Toby's benefits, but... Tell me about Toby. Jerry's voice became serious. God, Steve, I'm sorry. We processed the death certificate 3 weeks ago. Deborah Nash, well, Deborah Ames now, she changed it back, submitted all the paperwork. The life insurance paid out quickly. How quickly? Same day as the death certificate, which was unusual, but everything was in order legally. The beneficiary was listed as Deborah Nash, and since she was still technically married to you at the time of death. Steve closed his eyes. What hospital was he treated at? Millbrook General initially, then transferred to County Medical when the insurance ran out. But Steve, I have to tell you, something fell off about the whole thing. The medical reports were pretty minimal, and when I tried to follow up with his doctors, what? The attending physician at County said the boy was responsive and the treatment was working when the family decided to withdraw care. Said he'd never seen anything like it. A kid fighting that hard with family who just walked away. Steve's grip tightened on the phone. Did anyone try to contact me? That's the thing. According to the records, they tried. But all the contact information on file led back to your wife. She claimed the military couldn't reach you due to operational security. Another lie. Steve's unit had satellite communication, and emergency Red Cross messages always got through. If someone had tried to contact him about his dying son, he would have received it within hours. Jerry, I need a favor. Can you give me copies of all the paperwork? Medical records, insurance claims, death certificate, everything. Absolutely. I'll have it ready by morning. Steve, there's something else you should know. What? Your son's case caught the attention of someone at social services. There's an ongoing investigation into potential medical neglect. If you want to speak with the investigator, give me the name. Rita Hopkins. She's been trying to piece together what happened, but without family cooperation, her hands are tied. Steve made a note. Anything else I should know? Donald Fox's name came up during the investigation. Apparently, he has a history. Previous marriage ended in a similar situation. Wife died in a car accident after a fight about money, substantial insurance payout. Nothing provable, but worth knowing. Exactly. Be careful, Steve. This guy isn't just opportunist. He's dangerous. After hanging up, Steve sat in the gathering darkness of his motel room and began to plan. First, he needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to him and his son. Then, he needed to decide how to respond. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you were back in town. Country Kitchen Diner, Highway 9. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. Come alone. A friend. Steve stared at the message. In his experience, mysterious contacts could mean anything from intelligence assets to traps. But right now, he needed all the information he could get. He texted back, "How do I know you're a friend?" The response came quickly, because I was there when they brought Toby to county care. I held his hand. Steve felt something crack in his chest. Someone had been there for his son when he couldn't be. Someone cared enough to reach out now. I'll be there, he typed back. The next morning, Steve arrived at the country kitchen 20 minutes early, a habit ingrained by years of military operations. He took a booth with a clear view of the entrance and exits, ordered coffee, and waited. At exactly 7 a.m., a woman in scrubs entered the diner. Mid-30s, tired eyes, the look of someone who carried other people's pain for a living. She spotted him immediately. Probably the only man in the diner, sitting ramrod straight with military bearing, and approached his table. Steve Nash. She slid into the seat across from him. I'm Rita Hopkins, Child Protective Services. The investigator. Among other things, Rita's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. I'm also the nurse who volunteered at County Medical during my off hours. I met your son. Steve's coffee cup rattled slightly as he set it down. Tell me. Toby was brave, Rita said simply. Braver than any 8-year-old should have to be. When his mother and her boyfriend stopped visiting, stopped paying for treatment, he never complained. Just kept asking when his daddy was coming home. What exactly happened? Rita pulled a manila folder from her purse. Officially, I can't share this with you. Unofficially, I think you deserve to know what your son went through. She opened the folder, revealing medical records, photographs, and handwritten notes. Toby was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 4 months ago. It's very treatable in children. Survival rates over 90% with proper care. He responded well to initial treatment. But treatment is expensive. Deborah's insurance covered the basics, but the enhanced protocols that would have given Toby the best chance required significant copays. When Donald Fox entered the picture, Rita shook her head. The money stopped. Treatment stopped. And 3 weeks later, Toby was transferred to county care for palliative treatment only. Steve studied the medical records. His son's blood counts, treatment schedules, doctor's notes, all painting a picture of a boy fighting for his life while the adults around him calculated financial costs. This note here, Steve pointed to a handwritten entry. What does this mean? Patient continues to respond well to treatment. With continued therapy, excellent prognosis expected. That was written 2 days before Deborah withdrew consent for treatment. The implications hit Steve like a physical blow. His son hadn't been dying. He'd been healing, and they'd killed him anyway. There's more, Rita continued quietly. Donald Fox visited exactly once to discuss financial arrangements and insurance beneficiaries. He seemed more interested in the payout timeline than Toby's condition. She pulled out another document. This is Toby's last drawing. He gave it to me the day before. Steve's hands shook as he took the paper. It was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, a small boy, a woman, and a man in what looked like military fatigues. Above them, in a child's careful handwriting, my family. I love you, Daddy. Come home soon. The rage that Steve had been controlling for 24 hours finally broke free, but not in the way he expected. Instead of fury, he felt clarity. Crystal clear, diamond-hard clarity about what needed to be done. Rita, he said quietly, what would you say if I told you I was going to make sure they paid for what they did? Rita studied his face for a long moment. I'd say that justice and revenge aren't always the same thing. But sometimes, she gathered her papers. Sometimes they aligned perfectly. She stood to leave, then paused. Steve, your son talked about you constantly. He believed until the very end that you'd come home and save him. Maybe you can't save him now, but you can make sure this never happens to another child. After Rita left, Steve sat alone in the diner booth, staring at his son's drawing. Around him, the sounds of morning breakfast rush faded to white noise as a plan began forming in his mind. Donald Fox and Deborah thought they'd gotten away with murder. They thought Steve was just another heartbroken veteran who'd roll over and accept their version of events. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. Chapter 3, Building the Foundation. The Millbrook Public Library was a sanctuary of quiet efficiency, its computer terminals providing free internet access to anyone with a library card. Steve had obtained one using his old address before anyone thought to update the records, and now spent his 3rd day back in town conducting reconnaissance. Modern warfare had taught him that information was the most powerful weapon available. Before engaging any enemy, you studied their patterns, weaknesses, financial vulnerabilities, and pressure points. Donald Fox and Deborah weren't insurgents, but the same principles applied. Donald Fox's digital footprint was extensive and revealing. Social media posts showed a man who loved displaying wealth. Expensive dinners, luxury cars, country club memberships, vacation photos from places like Cancun and Aspen. But cross-referencing public records revealed a different story. Fox had been married twice before Deborah. His first wife, Caroline Fox, had died in a car accident in 2018, single vehicle crash on a rainy night after neighbors reported hearing a loud argument from their house. Insurance payout, $350,000. His second wife, Michelle Fox, had committed suicide in 2020 according to the death certificate, though medical examiners' notes mentioned unusual circumstances. Insurance payout, $500,000. Both women had children from previous marriages. Both children had died of medical complications within a year of their mother's deaths. In both cases, Fox had been the beneficiary of their life insurance policies. Steve leaned back in his chair, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This wasn't just about Deborah's betrayal or even Toby's death. This was about a pattern. Donald Fox was a predator who targeted vulnerable families, manipulated his way into their lives, and then systematically eliminated them for financial gain. The fact that he'd chosen Steve's family wasn't personal. It was just business. "Excuse me, are you Steve Nash?" Steve looked up to find an elderly man with kind eyes standing beside his computer terminal. The man wore a VFW cap and had the bearing of a career military man. "Depends who's asking." "Harvey Raymond. I served with your father in Vietnam. Heard you were back in town." Harvey's voice carried the weight of shared understanding. "I also heard about your boy." "I'm sorry." Steve saved his research and closed the browser. "Thank you. Mind if I sit? There's something you should know." They moved to a quiet corner table in the library's reference section. Harvey looked around to ensure privacy before speaking. "I've been keeping an eye on things while you were deployed. Your father asked me to before he passed. Didn't feel right what was happening to your family. What did you see?" "Donald Fox showing up about 3 years ago. Real smooth operator, expensive suits, fancy car, always had money to flash around. Started hanging around the country club where your wife worked part-time at the pro shop." Steve had known Deborah was working. She'd never mentioned it in her letters. At first, it looked innocent enough. Just another rich guy throwing money around, trying to impress the staff. But then Deborah started wearing expensive clothes, jewelry, getting her hair done at that fancy salon downtown. When people asked, she said she'd gotten a promotion. But you didn't believe it. Promotion from selling golf balls to making enough for diamond earrings? "I've been around long enough to recognize what was really happening." Harvey leaned forward. "Steve, this town isn't that big. People talk. And what they were saying about your wife and Fox, it wasn't good. Tell me." "Public displays at restaurants. Trips together when she claimed you were unreachable for family emergencies. Moving him into your house 6 months ago. But here's the thing that really bothered me. When Toby got sick, the whole town wanted to help. Church groups, veterans organizations, even the local businesses. We raised over $15,000 for his treatment." Steve felt his jaw clench. "What happened to the money?" Deborah refused it. Said the family preferred to handle things privately. But then, 2 weeks later, Donald Fox bought a new boat. $20,000 base boat with all the accessories. The pattern was becoming clearer. Not only had they abandoned his son, they'd actively prevented others from helping him. "Harvey, I need to ask you something. If someone was planning to make Fox and Deborah pay for what they did, hypothetically, would that person have community support?" Harvey studied Steve's face carefully. "Hypothetically? Most folks in this town think what happened to your boy was murder, plain and simple. Problem is it was all legal. They had the paperwork, the authority, the lawyers. Nothing anyone could do officially. And unofficially? Unofficially, I'd say that sometimes justice comes from places the law can't reach. And sometimes good people need to look the other way when justice is being served." Harvey reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "My nephew, Glenn Alexander. He's a private investigator now, retired military police. If someone needed help gathering information or understanding local resources, Glenn would be a good person to call." After Harvey left, Steve sat in the library for another hour, refining his understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Donald Fox was a serial killer who used the legal system as his weapon. Toby wasn't his first victim, and without intervention, he wouldn't be the last. That evening, Steve called Glenn Alexander. "Uncle Harvey said you might be willing to help with the situation," Steve said without preamble. "Depends on the situation. And who's asking?" "Steve Nash. My son was Toby Nash." A pause. "Jesus. Yeah, I'll help. What do you need?" "Everything you can find on Donald Fox. Financial records, previous marriages, insurance claims, criminal history, if any. Also, I need to understand the legal landscape. What's possible and what isn't." "That's a tall order. This kind of investigation could take weeks." "I have time. And money." "It's not about money, Sergeant. Your Uncle Harvey told me what happened to your boy. Some things are personal." They arranged to meet the next day. Glenn would bring everything he'd already compiled. Apparently, Steve wasn't the first person to ask questions about Donald Fox. Steve's final call was to Jerry Manning at the VA. "Jerry, I need to understand something about Toby's death certificate and insurance claim. You said the timing was unusual, same-day processing." "Yeah, that stuck out. Usually takes weeks to process life insurance claims, especially for minors. But this one went through immediately. Like all the paperwork was prepared in advance." "Which suggests what?" "Which suggests someone knew exactly when the child was going to die and had everything ready." "Steve, I've seen a lot of these cases, and this one feels planned." After the calls, Steve walked to the cemetery. Potter's Field was exactly what he'd expected, a sparse section of the county cemetery where indigent burials took place. Plot 47B held a simple metal marker. Toby Nash, 2015 to 2023, beloved son. Steve knelt beside the grave and placed his son's drawing under a small stone to keep it from blowing away. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," he whispered. "I'm sorry I trusted the wrong people. But I promise you this, they will pay for what they did. And I'll make sure they can never do it to another child." As he walked back to his rental car, Steve's phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Know you've been asking questions. Meet tomorrow night. Old Quarry on Route 7. Come alone. Information about Fox you need to hear." Steve stared at the message. Anonymous meetings were always dangerous, but in his current situation, information was worth the risk. He texted back, "Time? Midnight. And Nash, bring your service weapon." The suggestion that he'd need armed protection added a new dimension to the situation. Steve wasn't just dealing with white-collar criminals anymore. He was entering something darker. But as he thought about his son's grave in Potter's Field and Donald Fox's new boat, Steve realized he was ready for whatever came next. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Network. The abandoned quarry on Route 7 had been closed since the 1980s, leaving behind a crater lake surrounded by crumbling concrete barriers and rusted warning signs. Steve arrived 30 minutes early, parking his rental car a quarter-mile away and approaching on foot through the tree line. Years of combat operations had taught him to never walk into a potential ambush without understanding the terrain. The quarry offered excellent concealment but limited escape routes, a double-edged tactical situation. Either his mysterious contact was legitimately concerned about security, or this was a trap. Steve positioned himself on high ground with clear sight lines and waited. At 11:55 p.m., headlights swept across the quarry entrance. A pickup truck parked near the water's edge, and a lone figure emerged. Medium height, careful movements, someone who understood the value of caution. The figure flashed a penlight 3 times, a prearranged signal Steve hadn't agreed to, but which suggested military or law enforcement background. Steve approached from the darkness, his sidearm ready but not drawn. "Nash." The voice was female, older, tinged with a slight accent. "Who's asking?" "Someone who knows what Donald Fox really is." The woman stepped into the moonlight, revealing herself to be in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and intelligent eyes. "I'm Denise Marr. My daughter was Michelle Fox." Steve felt pieces clicking into place. His second wife. His second victim. Denise's voice carried years of suppressed rage. "Michelle didn't commit suicide, Sergeant. She was murdered, just like your son was murdered." They stood facing each other across the quarry's edge, 2 parents united by loss and a hunger for justice. "Tell me," Steve said simply. "Michelle was a single mother with an 8-year-old daughter, Annie. She met Donald at a grief support group. He was supposedly mourning his first wife, Caroline. Classic predator behavior. Target vulnerable women with children and insurance policies. Denise pulled a manila envelope from her jacket. Michelle started asking questions near the end. She found irregularities in Caroline's death, suspicious timing with Donald's debts, and patterns she didn't like. So she started documenting everything. What kind of patterns? Donald has a cycle. He targets single mothers with children, marries them, becomes beneficiary on life insurance policies, then creates situations where they die and the children follow shortly after from medical complications. He's been doing this for at least 10 years. Steve studied the documents by penlight. Medical records, insurance applications, police reports, financial statements. Michelle Fox had been building a case against her own husband. Why didn't she go to the police? She tried, but Donald has connections throughout the county. The sheriff's department, the prosecutor's office, even some judges. He's made himself valuable to certain people, and they protect him. Ow! Money laundering through his various business ventures. Political contributions. And blackmail. Donald has a talent for compromising people in positions of authority. The scope of the corruption was becoming clear. This wasn't just about one predator. It was about an entire system that enabled him. After Michelle died, I tried to get justice through official channels, Denise continued. But every investigation got buried. Every witness suddenly became uncooperative. Every piece of evidence mysteriously disappeared from evidence lockups. So you started your own investigation. Me and others. There's a whole network of people who've been touched by Donald Fox's activities. Parents, siblings, friends of victims. We've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment. What changed? You came home, a decorated war veteran whose child was murdered by the same man. Someone with skills and motivation who can't be bought off or intimidated. Steve understood. You want me to be your weapon. I want you to be our justice. Denise met his eyes directly. We have everything, evidence, witnesses, documentation of crimes going back a decade. But we need someone capable of acting on it. What kind of action? Whatever it takes. The legal system has failed. Law enforcement has been compromised. Traditional avenues of justice have been closed. That leaves alternative approaches. Steve weighed the implications. What Denise was describing amounted to vigilante justice on a systematic scale. It would mean abandoning any pretense of working within the system and accepting full responsibility for the consequences. Who else is involved in this network? Rita Hopkins, who you've already met. Glenn Alexander. Harvey Raymond connected you to him, and he's been feeding us information. Dr. Ernest O'Connor, who was Toby's oncologist before treatment was withdrawn. Janet Burns, the medical examiner who's been forced to sign off on suspicious death certificates. Oliver Mann, a prosecutor who's been blocked from investigating Fox-related cases. The list continued, painting a picture of a shadow organization of professionals who've been thwarted by corruption but remained committed to justice. What's the plan? That depends on you. We can provide intelligence, resources, alibis, technical support, whatever you need. But the operational decisions are yours to make. Denise handed him a secure phone. Encrypted communication with the network. Everything we've compiled on Donald Fox is in the device's memory. Study it, understand the scope of what you're dealing with, then tell us how you want to proceed. And if I decide this is too risky, too far outside the law, then your son's murder goes unpunished, and Donald Fox continues killing children until someone else is willing to stop him. Steve looked out over the dark water of the quarry, thinking about Toby's grave and the drawing his son had made. Then he thought about Annie Solis, Michelle's daughter, and Caroline's children before her. How many more would there be? Give me 48 hours to review everything. Then we'll talk about next steps. Denise nodded. Sergeant, what Donald did to your family, it was business to him. Just another transaction. When you make him pay, make sure he understands it's personal. After Denise left, Steve remained at the quarry for another hour, processing what he'd learned. The situation was more complex than he'd imagined, but also more clear-cut. Donald Fox wasn't just a criminal. He was a cancer that had metastasized throughout the community's institutions. Traditional medicine couldn't treat this kind of cancer. It required surgical intervention. Back at his motel, Steve spent the next 6 hours reviewing the encrypted files. The evidence was overwhelming and horrifying. Fox had been responsible for at least 7 deaths over the past decade, including 4 children. Each followed the same pattern: target vulnerable families, gain legal control, eliminate obstacles to insurance payouts. But the files also revealed something else: Fox's weaknesses. He was arrogant, predictable in his patterns, and overconfident in his protection from corrupt officials. He made mistakes, left evidence, created vulnerabilities that could be exploited. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Steve Nash made his decision. Donald Fox had declared war on innocent families. Now it was time to bring that war home to him. Chapter 5. The chess game begins. Glenn Alexander's private investigation office occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse, its windows offering a panoramic view of downtown Millbrook. Steve arrived at dawn, as requested, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a newfound sense of purpose. "You look like a man who's made some decisions," Glenn said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I've reviewed Denise's files. I'm in, but we do this right, planned, methodical, with minimal collateral damage." Glenn nodded approvingly. "Good, because what I'm about to show you changes everything." He led Steve to a conference table covered with photographs, documents, and surveillance equipment. "I've been watching Fox for the past year, documenting his patterns. But 3 days ago, something new developed." Glenn activated a tablet showing surveillance footage from the country club. The timestamp showed yesterday evening. Donald Fox sat at the bar with a woman Steve didn't recognize, blonde, mid-30s, wearing a wedding ring. "Meet Tiffany Yates," Glenn said. Recently widowed, mother of 2 young children, substantial life insurance beneficiary. Fox approached her yesterday, using his standard grief support routine. Steve's blood chilled. He's already hunting his next victim. Gets worse. "I ran background on Mrs. Yates. Her husband died 6 weeks ago in an industrial accident. She's vulnerable, financially stressed, and desperate for stability. Perfect target. How long do we have?" Based on his previous patterns, Fox will spend 2 to 3 months building the relationship before proposing marriage. Then another 6 to 8 months establishing legal authority over her affairs and her children's lives. We're looking at maybe 10 months before he starts the elimination phase. Steve studied the surveillance photos. 2 children, a boy about Toby's age and a younger girl. Both looked happy, innocent, unaware that a predator was circling their family. "We stop this now," Steve said firmly, "before he gets his hooks into them." "Agreed, but there's a problem." Glenn pulled up another set of files. "Fox knows you're back in town and asking questions. He's been making inquiries about you through his network. Worse, he's hired private security." The new photos showed 2 men in suits maintaining loose surveillance on the country club and Fox's usual haunts. "Professional, alert, armed. He's scared," Steve observed. "Or preparing. Intel suggests Fox has used muscle before when situations became complicated. These aren't just bodyguards, they're problem solvers." Steve's tactical mind began processing the new variables. Armed opposition changed the equation significantly. This wasn't just about outmaneuvering a white-collar criminal anymore. It was about dealing with a potentially violent criminal organization. What do we know about his security? Tyrone Swanson and Kent O'Neill, both ex-military, dishonorably discharged for black market activities while deployed. They've been working private security for questionable clients since returning stateside. No moral boundaries, willing to do whatever pays best. Military background means they'll be trained, disciplined, professional. But the dishonorable discharges suggest character flaws we can exploit. Glenn smiled grimly. "My thoughts exactly. Which brings me to our first operational objective." He spread out architectural blueprints on the table. "Fox's house, your old house. He's had security upgrades installed, but the basic structure is the same. Tomorrow night, he's hosting a dinner party for potential investors in his latest business venture. Perfect opportunity for surveillance and intelligence gathering." "What kind of intelligence?" "Financial records, communications, evidence of his criminal activities. If we can get into his home office, we can access everything." But more importantly, we can plant surveillance devices that will give us real-time intelligence on his future plans. Steve studied the blueprints, memory overlaying the modifications Fox had made. The office is upstairs, northeast corner. Used to be Toby's playroom. The fact that Fox had converted his son's space into his criminal headquarters added another layer of personal motivation to the mission. Security system? High-end, but standard. Motion sensors, cameras, silent alarms. However, I've identified vulnerabilities. The system has blind spots we can exploit, and more importantly, it's designed to keep out ordinary burglars, not military-trained operators. Glenn handed Steve her equipment bag. Surveillance devices, electronic lockpicks, signal jammers, and recording equipment. Everything you need for intelligence gathering. What about the security team? They'll be at the dinner party, but maintaining overwatch from outside the house. If you can get in and out without triggering alarms, they'll never know you were there. Steve examined the equipment, his mind already planning infiltration routes and extraction procedures. Timeline. Party starts at 7, usually runs until midnight. Best entry window is between 9 and 10. Everyone will be focused on dinner and presentations. Backup plans. Rita Hopkins will be at the hospital on shift, providing emergency medical support if needed. Oliver Mann is standing by with legal assistance if things go sideways. Denise Marr has a safe house prepared outside county jurisdiction. The operational framework was solid, professionally planned. Steve felt the familiar pre-mission focus settling over him, the same mental state that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations overseas. One more thing, Glenn said, his tone becoming serious. Dr. O'Connor wants to meet with you before the operation. He has information about Toby's final days that he couldn't share in official channels. An hour later, Steve sat in Dr. Ernest O'Connor's private office at Millbrook General Hospital. The oncologist was in his 60s, with kind eyes shadowed by years of fighting losing battles against disease and, apparently, human cruelty. Your son was extraordinary, Dr. O'Connor began without preamble. In 30 years of pediatric oncology, I've rarely seen a child fight so hard with such grace. Steve braced himself for whatever was coming. When Deborah first brought Toby in, his case was serious but entirely treatable. We started aggressive therapy immediately, and he responded beautifully. By the end of the first month, his blood counts were nearly normal. But then Fox got involved. Not just involved, he took control, started questioning every treatment decision, demanding cost-benefit analyses, pushing for alternative approaches that would be cheaper. When I refused to compromise Toby's care, they found another doctor. Who? Dr. Carlton Cross at County Medical. Cross has a reputation for flexible ethics when it comes to end-of-life decisions, especially when financial considerations are involved. Steve felt his anger building again. They doctor shopped until they found someone willing to let my son die. Worse than that, Cross actively recommended against continuing treatment that was working. He convinced them that Toby's case was hopeless when every indicator suggested the opposite. Dr. O'Connor pulled out a medical file. These are Toby's actual blood work results from his final week. Cross reported them as showing treatment failure. In reality, they showed a child who was beating cancer. The medical reports in front of Steve told a story of systematic deception. His son had been murdered not just through neglect, but through active medical fraud. Why didn't you intervene? I tried. I filed complaints with the medical board, contacted Child Protective Services, even reached out to the prosecutor's office. Every avenue was blocked. Cross has the same protection Donald Fox enjoys. Corruption or fear. Carlton Cross has information on a lot of people. Medical professionals who've made compromises, administrators who've overlooked irregularities, insurance executives who've processed questionable claims. He's made himself untouchable by making others complicit. Steve studied the real medical records, evidence that his son had been murdered not just by Donald Fox and Deborah, but by an entire system of corruption and cowardice. Doctor, if someone was planning to make these people pay for what they did, would that person have your support? Dr. O'Connor met Steve's eyes directly. If someone was planning to ensure this never happened to another child, That person would have more than my support. They'd have my active assistance. Steve left the hospital with new targets added to his list and a deeper understanding of the scope of the conspiracy he was fighting. This wasn't just about Donald Fox anymore. It was about dismantling an entire network of corruption that had cost his son's life and would cost other children's lives if left unchecked. That evening, as Steve prepared his equipment for the next night's operation, his secure phone buzzed with a message from Denise. Fox accelerating timeline with Yates family. Dinner date tomorrow night after the investor party. Whatever you're planning, make it count. The stakes had just risen. Steve wasn't just gathering intelligence anymore. He was racing against time to prevent the next tragedy. Tomorrow night would be the beginning of the end for Donald Fox. Chapter 6. Infiltration. The dinner party at 1247 Maple Street was in full swing by 9:15 p.m. Steve watched from the tree line behind his former home, using military-grade night vision to observe the target. 12 guests mingled in the dining room he'd once shared with his family, toasting Donald Fox's latest investment opportunity with expensive wine and laughter. The security team positioned themselves as Glenn had predicted, one man at the front of the house, one monitoring the back entrance, both maintaining radio contact. Professional placement, but they were watching for external threats, not someone who knew every inch of the property. Steve approached through the neighbor's yard, using the route he'd taken countless times to surprise Toby when returning from deployments. The oak tree beside Toby's former bedroom window was still there, its branches providing perfect concealment and access to the second floor. The house looked different in the darkness. Expensive landscaping had replaced the simple garden Deborah used to tend. New security lights cast harsh shadows across the yard, but the basic structure remained unchanged, and Steve's muscle memory guided him silently to his entry point. The window to what had been Toby's room, now Fox's office, was partially open to allow for air circulation. Steve slipped through it with practiced silence, his feet finding purchase on the hardwood floor without a sound. The transformation of the room hit him like a physical blow. Where Toby's baseball posters had hung, Fox had mounted awards and certificates celebrating his business achievements. Where his son's bookshelf had stood, Fox had installed a gun safe. Where Toby's bed had been, Fox had placed a leather chair behind an executive desk. Steve forced down the emotional response and focused on the mission. He had 30 minutes maximum before someone might notice his absence from the party security perimeter. Fox's computer was password protected, but not encrypted, a mistake that spoke to his overconfidence. Steve's electronic lockpicks, military-grade equipment designed for intelligence gathering, bypassed the security in less than 2 minutes. The files on Fox's computer were a goldmine of incriminating evidence. Financial records showing insurance payouts, correspondence with Dr. Carlton Cross about problematic patients, and detailed profiles of potential victims. The Tiffany Yates file was extensive. Her financial situation, her children's health records, even psychological assessments designed to identify manipulation tactics. But most damning was a folder labeled Cleanup Protocols, detailed plans for eliminating evidence and witnesses if Fox's activities came under scrutiny. Steve's own name appeared in recent documents, along with contingency plans for dealing with military-trained opposition. Steve downloaded everything onto encrypted drives while installing surveillance devices throughout the office. Micro cameras and audio pickups, virtually undetectable, would provide real-time intelligence on Fox's future activities. As he worked, sound from the dinner party filtered upstairs, Fox's voice holding court, describing his business acumen to potential investors. Steve recognized the tone. Practice charm masking predatory calculation. 25 minutes into the operation, Steve found what he'd been looking for in Fox's physical files: the original custody and medical power of attorney documents for Toby. The signatures were forged, the notarization was fraudulent, and the dates were backdated to before Fox had even met Deborah. The documents proved that Fox had been planning Toby's death from the beginning of his relationship with Deborah. This wasn't opportunistic criminality, it was premeditated murder. Steve photographed everything, uploaded the images to secure cloud storage, and began his extraction. But as he prepared to leave through the window, Voices in the hallway stopped him cold. Check the office recently? It was one of the security team. Locked and secure, Fox's voice replied. But take a look anyway. I want to discuss some new developments. Footsteps approached the office door. Steve had seconds to decide. Hide and risk discovery, or create a distraction and extract under cover of confusion. He chose a third option. Steve activated a small device Glenn had provided, an electronic signal jammer that would disrupt the house's security system for exactly 60 seconds. Long enough to create apparent system malfunction without triggering backup protocols. As alarms briefly sounded throughout the house, Steve slipped out the window and into the oak tree. Below, he could hear Fox and his security team rushing to investigate this system glitch. Probably just a power fluctuation, Fox was saying as Steve moved silently through the branches. But check everything twice. I want to know if anyone's been sniffing around. Steve reached the ground and melted back into the shadows, his mission complete. As he made his way to the extraction point, his secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Glenn. Package delivered. Check the news tomorrow. The next morning, Steve woke to find Millbrook's small newspaper dominated by a front-page story that changed everything. The headline read, "Local businessman under federal investigation for insurance fraud." The article, written by investigative journalist Juanita Merrill, detailed suspicious patterns in Donald Fox's business dealings and personal relationships. While it didn't explicitly accuse him of murder, it raised enough questions to trigger federal scrutiny and public suspicion. More importantly, it identified Dr. Carlton Cross as a person of interest in related medical fraud investigations. Steve's secure phone rang. It was Denise. "Did you see the news?" she asked. "I saw it. How did this happen so fast?" Juanita Merrill has been working on this story for months, but she needed evidence that couldn't be traced back to our network. The documents you retrieved last night provided exactly what she needed. What's the fallout? Fox is panicking. He's canceled his date with Tiffany Yates and is talking about leaving town. Dr. Cross has suspended his practice pending investigation. Most importantly, the federal authorities are now involved, which means Fox's local protection isn't worth much anymore. Steve felt satisfaction, but also concern. A corner predator is the most dangerous kind. What's our next move? That's where things get complicated. Fox knows someone is actively working against him now. He's hired additional security and is preparing for what he calls active defense measures. According to our surveillance, he's planning something drastic, such as eliminating potential witnesses and evidence, starting with anyone who might be able to testify against him. The implications were clear. Fox wasn't just planning to run. He was planning to cover his tracks with violence. Who's at risk? Everyone connected to the investigation. Medical professionals, social workers, potential witnesses. And at the top of the list, you. Steve considered the tactical situation. Fox was escalating from white-collar crime to violent crime, which actually worked in Steve's favor. It was much easier to justify aggressive action against someone who posed an active threat. "Denise, I need you to pass a message to the network. Anyone who's been involved in gathering evidence against Fox needs to implement immediate security protocols, vary routines, increase awareness, consider temporary relocation if possible." What about you? I'm going to end this. Fox wants to escalate? Fine, but he's about to learn that he picked the wrong veteran to threaten. Steve spent the rest of the morning preparing for what would likely be the final phase of his operation. Fox's transition to violent tactics had changed the rules of engagement. This was no longer about gathering evidence or working within legal frameworks. This was about survival, justice, and ensuring that Donald Fox never harmed another family. The gloves were coming off. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. The call came at 3:17 a.m., jolting Steve from tactical planning to immediate crisis mode. It was Dr. O'Connor, his voice tight with controlled fear. "They took Rita," he said without preamble. Fox's security team grabbed her outside the hospital 2 hours ago. There was a struggle, witnesses, but they had official-looking badges and claimed to be federal agents investigating her. Steve was already reaching for his clothes. Where? Unknown. But before they took her, she managed to send a text to Glenn. "Package delivered to the children." I think she's trying to tell us something. The children, Steve repeated, his mind racing. Tiffany Yates's children. Rita must have discovered something about Fox's immediate plans. There's more. Carlton Cross was found dead in his office an hour ago. Apparent suicide, but the timing is suspicious. And Juanita Merrill, the journalist who wrote the story, hasn't been seen since yesterday evening. The pattern was clear. Fox was eliminating anyone who could testify against him, starting with the most vulnerable members of their network. Doctor, implement the emergency protocols we discussed. Vary your routine. Stay in public places and don't go anywhere alone. What about you? I'm going to get Rita back and end this. Steve's first call was to Glenn Alexander, who answered on the first ring. You heard about Rita? Just now. Glenn, I need everything you have on Fox's security team and any safe houses or operational locations they might be using. I've been tracking them since the grab. Tyrone Swanson's vehicle was spotted heading toward the old industrial district. There's a warehouse complex out there that Fox's company rented 6 months ago, officially for storage, but I've never seen any legitimate activity. Send me the address. What about the other security contractor, O'Neill? Still mobile, probably handling other cleanup operations. Steve, this feels like an endgame scenario. Fox is burning everything down. The warehouse complex sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, a cluster of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. Steve approached through an adjacent field, using night vision to scout the perimeter. 2 vehicles in the parking area, Swanson's sedan and an unmarked van, both positioned for quick extraction. Light emanated from one building, and Steve could make out 2 figures through the windows. Armed, alert professional. But they were guarding a fixed position against an unknown threat, while Steve had the advantages of surprise, superior training, and intimate knowledge of urban combat tactics. Most importantly, he was fighting for more than money or mission completion. He was fighting for Rita's life and the memory of his son. Steve's approach was methodical and silent. Years of house-to-house combat in Afghanistan had taught him how to move through hostile territory without detection. The warehouse's loading dock provided concealment and an elevated entry point. From his position, he could hear voices inside. Boss wants this finished before dawn, Swanson was saying. The woman talks, then we dispose of evidence and move to the next target. What about the soldier? O'Neill's voice. Fox has a special plan for Nash. Wants to make him suffer first, like he made the boss suffer with all these investigations. Steve felt cold satisfaction. They were confirming everything he needed to know. Rita was inside, alive, and Fox was planning more violence. The warehouse interior was divided into office space and storage area. Rita was being held in the office, zip-tied to a chair but conscious and alert. 2 guards maintained positions that provided mutual support while watching the entrance. Professional setup, but they'd made one critical error. They'd positioned themselves to defend against threats from outside, not from someone who could access the warehouse's interior spaces. Steve used the building's structural framework to move above his targets, positioning himself in the rafters directly over their security perimeter. From here, he had clear shots on both guards and could reach Rita within seconds of initiating contact. But gunfire would bring Fox's other resources running, and Steve still needed information about the full scope of Fox's cleanup operation. Instead, he chose the silent approach. The first guard went down to a sleeper hold applied from above, a technique that rendered the target unconscious within seconds without permanent damage. Steve lowered the body silently, took his weapons and radio, then moved on the second guard. O'Neill had better reflexes, turning at the last second and reaching for his sidearm. But years of close-quarters combat training gave Steve decisive advantages in speed and technique. O'Neill was unconscious and zip-tied before he could raise an alarm. Rita, are you injured? Steve cut her restraints quickly, checking for signs of serious trauma. Bruised, but functional. Steve, they have a list, everyone connected to the investigation. Fox is planning to eliminate all potential witnesses tonight. Who else is at risk? Dr. O'Connor, Glenn Alexander, Denise Marr, others. They have addresses, routines, security vulnerabilities for everyone. Rita's voice was steady despite her ordeal. Fox has completely lost control. He's convinced that killing everyone will allow him to escape federal investigation. Steve checked the guards' equipment, finding encrypted radios, weapons, and tactical gear that confirmed this was a military-style operation. Fox wasn't just hiring security anymore. He was conducting warfare against the community. Rita, I need you to contact the network using secure channels. Tell everyone to implement maximum security protocols immediately. Don't go home. Don't follow predictable routines. Stay in groups when possible. What are you going to do? End this. Fox wants to escalate to violence? Fine. But he's about to learn that some people are much better at violence than others. Steve gathered intelligence from the warehouse, maps, target lists, communication equipment, and confirmation that Fox was operating from his house on Maple Street with a team of at least 6 contractors. More importantly, he found evidence that Fox had been planning this cleanup operation for weeks, since before Steve had even returned to town. This wasn't reactive desperation. This was premeditated mass murder. As Steve prepared to leave the warehouse, his secure phone buzzed with an emergency message from Glenn. Fox's team moving on Dr. O'Connor now. County Hospital, Emergency Department. The doctor who had tried to save Toby was about to become Fox's next victim. Steve looked at Rita. Can you get yourself to safety? I can handle myself. Go save Dr. O'Connor. Rita, when this is over, make sure people know that Fox chose this escalation. Everything that happens next is his decision. Steve left the warehouse and drove toward the hospital at maximum speed, his mind shifting into full combat mode. Fox had crossed the line from white-collar criminal to active terrorist. The rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. By declaring war on innocence, Donald Fox had invited a war he couldn't win. Chapter 8, The Final Gambit. Millbrook General Hospital at 4:30 a.m. was a maze of dimly lit corridors and skeleton crew staffing. Steve entered through the emergency department, his military bearing and confident manner allowing him to blend with off-duty personnel and visiting family members. Dr. O'Connor was in his office on the 3rd floor, working late on patient files. According to hospital security, 2 men claiming to be federal investigators had attempted to access the building 20 minutes earlier, but had been turned away due to improper credentials. They'd be back. Steve found Dr. O'Connor exactly where Glenn's intelligence indicated, in his private office, surrounded by medical files and looking exhausted from the stress of the past week. Doctor, Steve said quietly from the doorway. O'Connor looked up, relief flooding his face. Thank God. I got Rita's message about maximum security, but I couldn't leave the hospital with critical patients. They're coming for you tonight. We need to move now. Who's coming? Fox's security team. They've escalated to active violence. 3 people are already dead, and you're next on their list. Dr. O'Connor began gathering essential files. Where can we go that's safe? Nowhere. Fox has resources throughout the county, and federal protection won't arrive in time. Our only option is to face them here on ground we control. Steve studied the hospital's layout, his tactical mind processing defensive positions and escape routes. Doctor, how well do you know this building's security systems? Very well. I've been on the safety committee for 15 years. Good. We're going to use that knowledge to turn this hospital into a trap. For the next 20 minutes, Steve and Dr. O'Connor transformed the 3rd floor into a tactical maze. Security doors were locked and secured. Surveillance cameras were repositioned to provide complete coverage of approach routes, and emergency protocols were activated to limit civilian exposure. More importantly, Steve used his knowledge of Fox's psychology against him. Instead of hiding, he sent a message through the hospital's public address system. Donald Fox, this is Steve Nash. You want to finish this? I'm in Dr. O'Connor's office, 3rd floor, room 312. Come alone, or prove to everyone that you're a coward who hides behind hired muscle. The response was immediate. Steve's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. You killed my men at the warehouse. This ends tonight. Your men are alive, Steve replied. Just like my son should be. But you're right, this ends tonight. 20 minutes later, the hospital's security system registered unauthorized entry through a maintenance access on the ground floor. 4 heat signatures moving systematically through the building, checking each floor methodically. Fox was coming, but he wasn't coming alone. Steve had positioned Dr. O'Connor in the hospital's security office with full access to cameras and communication systems. From there, the doctor could coordinate with law enforcement while providing real-time intelligence on the approaching threat. 4 individuals, armed, moving up the main stairwell, Dr. O'Connor reported through his earpiece. They're dressed like tactical officers, but their equipment looks military-grade. Fox, leading from the front, arrogant to the end. Steve smiled grimly. Fox's arrogance would be his downfall. By personally leading the assault, he'd put himself in the line of fire instead of maintaining command distance. The 3rd floor of the hospital became a chessboard, with Steve controlling the high ground and multiple escape routes. He disabled the elevator, forcing Fox's team to use the stairs, a fatal funnel that limited their tactical options. When they reached the 3rd floor, Steve was ready. The first contractor through the stairwell door walked into a coordinated ambush. Steve had rigged the corridor with improvised flashbang devices, medical equipment repurposed to create blinding light and disorienting noise. In the chaos that followed, Steve neutralized the lead man with non-lethal force and seized his equipment. The second contractor tried to establish suppressing fire, but Steve had already moved to a flanking position. Years of urban combat experience guided his movements as he used the hospital's layout to maintain tactical advantage. Fox and his remaining contractor retreated to regroup, but they'd lost the initiative. Steve controlled the terrain, had superior training, and most importantly, had the moral authority of fighting for justice rather than profit. Fox, Steve called out from concealment. It's over. Your security team is down. Federal authorities are en route, and your entire criminal network has been exposed. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live long enough to face trial. You destroyed my life. Fox's voice echoed from the far end of the corridor. I built something perfect, and you ruined it with your military heroics. You killed my son. Your son was going to die anyway. I just made his death profitable. The casual cruelty in Fox's voice, the same tone he'd used when describing Toby's abandonment, triggered something primal in Steve's combat-trained psyche. The final confrontation came in the same room where Dr. O'Connor had once treated children with cancer. Children like Toby, who deserved better than the system had given them. Fox appeared in the doorway with his last remaining contractor, both armed, both desperate. But desperation made them reckless, while Steve remained coldly professional. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Steve's military training, superior positioning, and tactical planning overwhelmed Fox's hired muscle. When it was over, the contractor was unconscious and disarmed, and Donald Fox found himself facing Steve Nash across the room, where children had fought for their lives. "You want to kill me," Fox said, recognizing the look in Steve's eyes. "But you won't. You're too much of a Boy Scout. Too concerned with legal niceties and moral authority." Steve studied the man who had murdered his son and planned to murder countless others. Fox was right about one thing. Steve could kill him. Should kill him. Fox would never stop hunting innocents, would never face justice through normal channels, would never pay an appropriate price for his crimes. But as Steve raised his weapon, he heard something that changed everything. Sirens. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Federal authorities. Dr. O'Connor's voice came through his earpiece. FBI, state police, and county sheriff. They've surrounded the building. Steve smiled, understanding finally settling over him. "You're wrong about one thing, Fox. I don't need to kill you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that everything you've done tonight, the kidnapping, the murder attempts, the armed assault on a hospital, happened under federal surveillance. The warehouse, the hospital, all of it. We've been feeding information to the FBI for the past week." Fox's face went white as the implication sank in. "That's impossible. Oliver Mann, the prosecutor who's been blocked from investigating you, he's been working with federal authorities all along. Every piece of evidence we gathered, every crime you committed tonight, it's all been documented and witnessed by federal agents." The sound of tactical teams entering the building echoed through the corridors. "You see, Fox, I learned something important during my military service. Sometimes the best victory isn't killing your enemy. Sometimes it's ensuring they live long enough to face every consequence of their actions. Steve zip-tied Fox's hands and stepped back as federal agents swarmed the room. Donald Fox, the lead agent, announced, "You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and domestic terrorism." As Fox was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Steve with pure hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes," Steve said quietly. "It is." Chapter 9. Justice Served. 6 months later, Steve Nash stood beside a new grave marker in Millbrook Cemetery. No longer the sparse metal plate of Potter's Field, but a proper granite headstone that read, "Toby Nash, beloved son, hero who helped save other children." The morning sun cast warm light across the cemetery as other members of their unlikely family arrived for the memorial service. Rita Hopkins, fully recovered from her ordeal, brought flowers. Dr. O'Connor carried a small American flag. Glenn Alexander and Harvey Raymond arrived together, both men wearing their military dress uniforms. Denise Marr approached with a young woman Steve recognized from photographs, Tiffany Yates, whose children had been spared because of their collective efforts. "How are you holding up?" Denise asked gently. "Better," Steve replied honestly. "Some days are harder than others, but knowing that Toby's death led to justice for other families, it helps." The federal trial had been comprehensive and devastating for Donald Fox and his network. The evidence gathered by Steve's infiltration, combined with federal surveillance, had resulted in convictions for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and domestic terrorism. Fox received life in prison without parole. Dr. Carlton Cross had indeed committed suicide, but not before providing a detailed confession that implicated dozens of other participants in the corruption network. More importantly, Fox's conviction had triggered investigations in other states, leading to the discovery of additional victims and the prevention of future crimes. "Any word on the federal reforms?" Rita asked. "The Toby Nash Child Protection Act passed committee last week," Dr. O'Connor reported. "New requirements for medical oversight when treatment is withdrawn, mandatory federal reporting for suspicious insurance claims involving minors, and enhanced penalties for medical fraud." Steve felt satisfaction mixed with sorrow. His son's death had meaning now, had led to protections that would prevent other children from suffering the same fate. But it didn't bring Toby back. "Steve," a new voice called from behind them. He turned to find Oliver Mann, the prosecutor who had secretly coordinated with federal authorities. With him was a woman in her 30s wearing a military uniform. Major Heather Young, Judge Advocate General's Corps. "Major Young wanted to speak with you about something," Oliver said. "Sergeant Nash," Major Young began formally, "I've been authorized to offer you a position with the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. Your performance during the Fox investigation demonstrated exactly the kind of skills and judgment we need for complex criminal cases." Steve considered the offer. A return to military service, but focused on justice rather than warfare. The opportunity to use his skills to protect innocents on a larger scale. What kind of cases? Corruption, fraud, crimes against service members and their families. The kind of systemic problems that require someone who understands both military operations and civilian law enforcement. "I'll consider it," Steve said. "But right now, I have some obligations here." Major Young nodded respectfully. "The offer stands when you're ready." After the others left, Steve remained alone at Toby's grave. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind through the trees. The same trees where he and Toby had played during weekend visits before deployments. "I kept my promise," he said softly. "Fox and everyone who helped him are paying for what they did. And other kids are safe because of what you went through." Steve placed a small object beside the headstone. Toby's favorite baseball card, the one that had been missing from his belongings when Steve returned home. He'd found it in Donald Fox's office, apparently kept as some kind of trophy. His phone buzzed with a message from Tiffany Yates. "Thank you for saving my children. They're starting Little League next week." Toby would have been proud. Attached was a photo of her son and daughter in baseball uniforms, smiling and healthy and alive because Steve had chosen justice over revenge. Standing in the warm morning sun beside his son's grave, Steve Nash realized that some victories weren't measured in enemy casualties or mission completions. Sometimes victory meant ensuring that evil didn't triumph, that innocents were protected, and that a child's death led to other children's lives being saved. He'd come home from war to find his family destroyed and his son murdered. But in seeking justice for Toby, he found a new family among the people who'd helped him fight for what was right. And in ensuring that Donald Fox faced consequences for his crimes, he'd honored his son's memory in the most meaningful way possible. The war was over. Justice had been served. And somewhere in the warmth of the morning sun, Steve felt his son's presence, proud, peaceful, and finally at rest. Steve Nash had come home from one war to fight another. Now, both wars were finished, and the victory belonged to the innocent. As he walked away from the cemetery, Steve pulled out his phone and dialed Major Yang's number. Major? This is Steve Nash. I'd like to discuss that position you mentioned. It seems I'm not quite ready to stop fighting for justice. Behind him, Toby's headstone caught the morning light, and the inscription seemed to glow. Hero who helped save other children. Some battles were worth fighting. Some victories were worth the cost. And some heroes never wore uniforms at all. They just needed someone willing to fight for them when they couldn't fight for themselves.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.